found my sister in a bathtub of blood after her bully posted photos of her self-harm scars. So my mom convinced our cousin that he'd been molested by the bully's parents and got them arrested. But when their 7-year-old son was dragged away, screaming by CPS, my sister attempted again because she'd become the reason an innocent kid lost everything. I walked in on my sister laying in a bathtub of red water with a razor in her hand. "I'm sorry," was all she whispered before her eyes rolled to the back of her head. At the hospital, I checked her phone expecting concerned texts. Instead, I saw her friends joking about how the world would be better off without her. The doctors managed to save Abby, but she wouldn't speak to anyone after that. She just stared at the ceiling while machines beeped around her. Mom sat beside the bed holding Abby's bandaged wrists and whispering, "I should have protected you," over and over. I found the sewer slide note crumpled in her jacket pocket with one name circled in what looked like blood: Madison O'Neill, the girl who'd been making Abby's life hell for months. Mom changed after that night. She channeled all her guilt into action, and honestly, at first, I was relieved to see her doing something other than crying. She documented everything we could find about the bullying, screenshots of messages telling Abby to unalive herself, witness statements from kids who saw Madison push Abby down the stairs. Mom joined the PTA and started speaking at school board meetings about bullying prevention. Other parents started coming to her for advice about their own kids being bullied. Mom's turning her pain into purpose, I told myself while watching her give presentations about warning signs. Abby even started talking again in therapy and came home after 2 weeks. Mom had removed anything sharp from the house, but somehow made it feel safe instead of like a prison. She created schedules for Abby's medications and therapy appointments. Everything seemed to be healing. But then I noticed the changes. Mom installed cameras in every room, including the bathrooms. For sewer slide watch, she explained when I questioned it. I caught her at 3 a.m., reviewing footage of Abby sleeping and taking notes about her breathing patterns. Abby couldn't even shower without Mom watching the feed from her phone. Mom also kept a filing cabinet labeled evidence that she'd lock whenever I walked by. She started referring to justice for victims instead of healing during her speeches. Things escalated when Madison struck again. During gym class, she grabbed Abby's arm and pulled up her sleeve in front of everyone. "Oh my gosh, are those real?" Madison gasped loud enough for the whole class to hear. She took photos while Abby tried to cover herself. Within hours, the pictures were circulating through group chats with captions like, "Attention seeker's receipt," and "She couldn't even do it right." Abby came home destroyed. Mom's face went completely still when she saw the messages. "She's hunting the wounded now," Mom said in this flat voice I'd never heard before. After that, Mom went into overdrive. She created fake social media profiles to infiltrate Madison's friend groups and started documenting her every move: which Starbucks she went to, what parties she attended, who she talked to between classes. Mom made me drive by Madison's house every night so she could check patterns and take photos. She somehow befriended Madison's mom at a yoga class using a fake name and secretly recorded all their conversations. When Abby's therapist suggested Mom focus more on Abby's healing instead of Madison, Mom switched therapists the next day. "I am protecting her," Mom snapped when I tried to intervene. "You don't understand how predators work. She's probably targeting other vulnerable girls right now." Our family dinners turned into briefings about Madison's activities. Abby started asking why Mom talked about Madison more than her, but Mom was too busy printing screenshots and adding them to her files to notice. I could feel something big coming but had no idea what Mom was planning. The signs were everywhere though. Locked laptop screens whenever I walked by. Hushed phone calls with our cousin Kevin who'd been in trouble before. Money withdrawals from Abby's college fund. Mom kept saying, "Soon she'll never hurt anyone again," with this satisfied smile. Then one Tuesday, everything exploded. I was at school when my phone started blowing up. "Did you see what happened to Madison's family?" The videos were everywhere. Police arresting Madison's parents at their jobs. Her 7-year-old brother screamed as CPS workers carried him to a van while he clutched a stuffed teddy bear. Madison being loaded into a different van, headed for Riverside Youth Facility, which everyone knew was basically juvenile jail. I raced home to find Mom calmly watching the news coverage. "Kevin finally told the truth about what happened during tutoring," she said. "What tutoring? Kevin barely knows them." Mom showed me a folder of forged receipts and photoshopped pictures placing Kevin at their house. He remembered how Mr. O'Reilly touched him inappropriately, how scared he was to speak up. I felt sick. "You made Kevin lie?" "Madison posted pictures of my baby's scars." Mom's calm shattered. "She hunted her when she was weakest. This is justice." The truth was worse than I imagined. Mom had been convincing Kevin for weeks that he was groomed and touched inappropriately, planted evidence, made sure Riverside Youth Facility had an open bed by calling in favors from her support group connections. "The system assigns based on availability," she explained while watching footage of Madison arriving at the facility with a garbage bag of belongings. Her parents should have raised her better. Abby found out through Instagram when a friend showed her videos after therapy. Someone had filmed everything, including the 7-year-old brother being torn from his home. "What did Mom do?" Abby kept asking. "What did she do?" That night, I found Abby bleeding again. Her new note said, "I became the reason an innocent kid lost everything. I'm the bully now." I rushed to the bathroom and found her sitting on the floor with fresh cuts on her arms. Not deep ones this time, but enough to draw blood. Mom was still downstairs watching news coverage of the O'Reilly family's destruction like it was her favorite movie. I grabbed towels and pressed them against Abby's wounds while she sobbed into my shoulder. Her whole body shook as she kept repeating that she was worse than Madison ever was. At least Madison only hurt one person. Because of Abby, an entire family was destroyed. The paramedics arrived within minutes. Mom finally tore herself away from the TV when she heard the sirens. She put on her concerned mother act for the EMTs, but I saw the annoyance flash across her face when they said Abby would need another psychiatric hold. This wasn't part of her plan. At the hospital, I stayed with with Abby while Mom filled out paperwork. She held my hand so tight I thought she might break my fingers. The guilt was eating her alive from the inside out. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw that little boy screaming for his parents. Mom tried to visit, but Abby refused to see her. The nurses had to escort Mom out when she started demanding access to her daughter. I heard her in the hallway insisting this was all Madison's fault for pushing Abby to this point. She couldn't see that she'd become the real monster in this story. That night, I went through Mom's filing cabinet while she was at the hospital arguing with administrators. The evidence she'd collected was extensive, but most of it was fabricated. Doctored screenshots, staged photos, pages of notes about how to coach Kevin into giving convincing testimony. She'd spent months orchestrating this revenge. I found her laptop still logged in and discovered even more. Mom had joined online forums for parents of bullied children, but used them to research revenge tactics. She'd studied similar cases where families were torn apart by false accusations. One folder was labeled contingency plans, with ideas for escalating if the O'Reillys somehow recovered. The worst part was finding Abby's real medical records. The ones Mom showed at her presentations were edited to make the bullying seem worse than it was. Yes, Madison had been cruel. Yes, she'd pushed Abby around and said horrible things, but Mom had amplified everything to justify her revenge. She'd turned Abby into a prop for her own crusade. I took photos of everything with my phone, evidence of the evidence, I guess. Then I drove to the youth facility where Madison was being held. I couldn't get in to see her, but I left a letter with the front desk explaining what Mom had done. I didn't know if it would help, but I had to try something. Kevin was my next stop. I found him at his apartment looking like he hadn't slept in days. He broke down when he saw me, confessing everything. How Mom had convinced him he'd repressed memories of abuse. How she'd shown him recovered memory therapy videos until he started believing her lies. She'd promised to pay off his debts if he testified. He showed me text messages from Mom coaching him on what to say. Voice recordings of their practice sessions where she'd correct him if his story didn't sound believable enough. She'd even given him pills she claimed would help him remember, but made him feel foggy and confused instead. We went to the police together, but they said it was complicated. Kevin had already given sworn testimony. Changing his story now could get him charged with perjury. The detective suggested we get a lawyer, but neither of us had money for that. The system Mom had weaponized wasn't easy to undo. Meanwhile, the O'Reilly family was falling apart. The dad lost his job because of the arrest. The mom was fighting to get their son back from foster care. Madison was put in solitary after getting into a fight with another girl who'd heard about the accusations. Mom had destroyed them as thoroughly as she'd planned. I tried talking to Dad, but he was useless. He'd checked out emotionally years ago and just went along with whatever Mom did. When I showed him the evidence of her lies, he just shrugged and said she was grieving in her own way. I wonder what's going through the mom's mind as she watches that news coverage like it's entertainment. There's something really strange about how she went from being a worried mother to someone who enjoys watching a family get torn apart. He didn't want to rock the boat. Abby called me from the hospital psych ward. They'd put her on new medications, but she still couldn't stop thinking about that little boy. She'd seen a news report that he'd stopped eating in foster care. He just sat in the corner clutching his teddy bear and crying for his parents. Mom visited Abby again, this time getting past the nurses by claiming it was an emergency. Abby told me later that Mom spent the whole visit ranting about how the O'Reillys deserved everything that happened to them, how this was justice for what Madison did. She couldn't understand why Abby wasn't grateful. That's when Abby told Mom she never wanted to see her again. Mom exploded, accusing the doctors of turning Abby against her. Security had to remove her while she screamed about parental rights and threatened to sue the hospital. The scene was so bad they extended Abby's hold for her own protection. I started sleeping at friends' houses because I couldn't stand being around Mom. She'd become obsessed with proving she was right. She printed out articles about bullying-related suicides and left them around the house. She gave interviews to local bloggers about her success story in getting justice for her daughter. The school held an assembly about the dangers of false accusations after parents started panicking. Mom showed up and tried to give an impromptu speech about believing victims, but they escorted her out. She'd become a pariah in our community but refused to see it. Then things got worse. Mom found out I'd been visiting Kevin and trying to help the O'Reillys. She confronted me in the kitchen, waving printed screenshots of my text messages. She'd been monitoring my phone through some parental control app I didn't even know existed. She accused me of betraying our family, of choosing Abby's bully over my own sister. When I tried to explain that she'd gone too far, she slapped me across the face. It was the first time she'd ever hit me. We stared at each other in shock before she stormed out. That night, I packed a bag and went to stay with my aunt. Mom sent dozens of texts alternating between apologizing and threatening me. She said if I didn't come home, she'd report me as a runaway. Then she said she'd already lost one daughter and couldn't lose another. The manipulation was constant. I visited Abby again and told her everything. She looked so tired, like she'd aged years in just a few days. She made me promise to protect myself from Mom, to not let her drag me down too. It broke my heart to see my little sister trying to protect me when she could barely protect herself. The next day, I got a call from Madison's mom. She was crying so hard I could barely understand her. Madison had attempted to hurt herself in the facility. She'd used a broken piece of plastic from her meal tray. They'd found her just in time, but she was in critical condition. I felt the weight of everything crushing down on me. Mom had started this cycle of destruction, and now it was spinning out of control. Madison, who'd been a bully but still just a kid, was fighting for her life. Her family was destroyed. Abby was locked in a psych ward, and Mom was still convinced she was the hero of this story. I hung up the phone with Madison's mom, my hands trembling. The cycle Mom had started was claiming another victim. I knew I had to act fast before more lives were destroyed. My Aunt Nathy found me crying in her guest room that evening. She sat on the bed and rubbed my back while I explained everything. Her face hardened when I showed her the photos I'd taken of Mom's files. She immediately called her lawyer friend to discuss options, but the response wasn't encouraging. Without Kevin willing to officially recant, and with the legal process already in motion, reversing the damage would take time the O'Reillys didn't have. The next morning, I snuck back home while Mom was at her support group meeting. I needed more evidence, something concrete that could help the O'Reillys immediately. The house felt different now, like a crime scene. Every room held traces of Mom's obsession. Madison's schedule taped inside kitchen cabinets, photos of her family members pinned behind furniture, notes about their routines hidden in recipe books. I found Mom's backup laptop in the attic, the one she thought I didn't know about. The password was Abby's birthday, predictable and heartbreaking. Inside were folders within folders of manufactured evidence. Photoshopped images placing Kevin at the O'Reilly house, forged therapy notes, fake text conversations. But most damning was a video file labeled Practice Session 3. I watched Mom coaching Kevin, feeding him lines about abuse that never happened. She corrected his body language, adjusted his story for maximum impact. Kevin looked confused and drugged in the footage. Mom kept handing him pills throughout, telling him they would help him remember clearly. I copied everything onto multiple USB drives and hid them around my aunt's house. Then I made the mistake of checking Mom's recent files. She'd been researching Madison's hospital room number. Screenshots showed the facility's visiting hours and security protocols. A new document outlined a plan to comfort Madison during her recovery. My blood ran cold. Racing back to my aunt's house, I called the youth facility to warn them. The receptionist assured me they had strict protocols, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Mom would find a way. She always did. That afternoon, Mom showed up at my aunt's door. She looked haggard, her usually perfect appearance crumbling. She'd figured out where I was staying. My aunt tried to block the doorway, but Mom pushed past her, searching for me. I hid in the bathroom while Mom ranted in the living room. She accused my aunt of poisoning me against her, of not understanding what Madison had done to our family. When my aunt mentioned the false accusations, Mom's voice turned dangerous. She said anyone who defended a bully was just as guilty. My aunt threatened to call the police if Mom didn't leave. Mom laughed, saying she had friends in the department now, other parents who understood the pain of watching their children suffer. She'd built a network through her support groups, parents who saw her as a hero for taking action. After Mom finally left, my aunt installed new locks and a security system. We both knew it was just a temporary solution. Mom's obsession was escalating, and she had resources I hadn't realized. The support groups she'd infiltrated weren't just for comfort anymore. They were her army. I tried calling Dad again, but his phone went straight to voicemail. When I drove by our house that night, I saw his car was gone. A neighbor later told me he'd packed up and left for his brother's place in another state. Even he couldn't handle what Mom had become. The next few days blurred together. I spent hours documenting everything I could find about Mom's schemes. My aunt helped me organize the evidence into a coherent timeline. We reached out to a journalist my aunt knew, but she said without Kevin's cooperation or official documentation, the story was too risky to publish. Meanwhile, Abby's condition worsened. The hospital called to say she'd stopped eating and wouldn't speak to anyone. The guilt was consuming her. When I visited, she just stared at the wall. The spark in her eyes had died completely. Mom somehow got herself appointed as Abby's medical advocate despite the restraining order the hospital had tried to implement. She used her connections in the mental health community, people who'd heard her speak at conferences and believed her victim narrative. She convinced them the hospital was interfering with her maternal rights. During one visit, I overheard Mom telling Abby that Madison had gotten what she deserved, that her sewer slide attempt was just another manipulation tactic. Abby started hitting herself in the head repeatedly until nurses had to restrain her. Mom watched with this satisfied expression, like Abby's breakdown proved her point about Madison's evil influence. I confronted Mom in the hospital parking lot. She didn't even pretend anymore. She told me I was too young to understand justice, that sometimes good people had to do hard things to protect the innocent. When I mentioned the O'Reillys' 7-year-old son, she said he was better off away from parents who'd raised a monster. That's when I realized Mom wasn't going to stop. In her mind, she'd rewritten reality. Madison was a predator. The O'Reillys were complicit. Anyone who disagreed was either naive or corrupted. She'd convinced herself so thoroughly that I think she actually believed it. I started reaching out to other families Mom had helped through her support groups. The stories were eerily similar. Parents who'd been encouraged to take extreme measures against their children's bullies. Most had stopped short of Mom's level, but a few mentioned strange suggestions about permanent solutions that had made them uncomfortable. One mother, Mrs. Sebastian, agreed to meet with me. Her daughter had been bullied the previous year, and Mom had tried to recruit her for something she called the Justice Project. Mrs. Sebastian had backed out when Mom started talking about planting evidence and coordinating false reports. She gave me names of other parents Mom had approached. Building this network took weeks. All the while, Madison remained in critical condition. Her family was still separated, and Abby grew more catatonic. Mom used her influence to get herself appointed to the school's anti-bullying committee, where she pushed for harsher punishments and broader definitions of what constituted threats. She started a blog called Mama Bear Justice that gained thousands of followers. Parents from across the state reached out to her for advice. She carefully curated her image, never mentioning the destroyed family or the fabricated evidence. Mom's spiral from helicopter parent to full-blown supervillain is complete with her own evil organization called the Justice Project, because nothing says loving mother like recruiting other parents into your evidence-planting scheme while your actual daughters fall apart. To her followers, she was a hero who'd saved her daughter from a dangerous bully. I watched her transformation with horror and fascination. The guilt that had initially driven her had morphed into something else entirely. She fed on the admiration, the power, the sense of purpose. Destroying Madison's family hadn't been enough. Now she wanted to create a movement. Kevin finally reached his breaking point when Mom contacted him about testifying at a conference. She wanted him to share his his survival story with other victims. The thought of perpetuating the lie to hundreds of people broke something in him. He called me sobbing, saying he couldn't live with himself anymore. We met at a diner outside town where Mom wouldn't spot us. Kevin looked terrible, thin and shaky from withdrawal. He'd stopped taking the pills Mom had given him and was starting to think clearly again. He told me the full extent of Mom's manipulation, how she'd found him at his lowest point and convinced him he was a victim. The pills, he discovered, were a mild hallucinogen mixed with anxiety medication. They made him suggestible and confused, easier to manipulate. Mom had gotten them from another parent in her support group who worked at a pharmacy. The network ran deeper than I'd imagined. Kevin agreed to write out a full confession, but he was terrified of perjury charges. My aunt's lawyer friend said he might be able to claim coercion and diminished capacity due to the substances, but it would be a hard fight. Kevin didn't care anymore. The guilt was eating him alive just like it was destroying Abby. We decided to go to the O'Reilly's lawyer first. If anyone could help navigate the legal maze, it would be them. But when we arrived at the address Kevin had, we found an eviction notice. The family's legal funds had run out. They were representing themselves now. A disaster in a system Mom had learned to manipulate. I used some money from my college savings to pay for a consultation with a new lawyer. She reviewed Kevin's confession and the evidence I'd collected. Her assessment was grim, but not hopeless. With Kevin's testimony and the video evidence, they could potentially get the charges dropped, but reuniting the family would take longer. Mom must have had informants everywhere because she found out about the lawyer visit within hours. She showed up at my aunt's house with 2 other parents from her support group. They stood on the lawn like some twisted intervention, holding signs about protecting children and justice for victims. My aunt called the police, but Mom and her friends left before they arrived. The message was clear though. Mom had backup now. She wasn't just a grieving mother anymore. She was a leader, a crusader, and she had followers who believed in her cause. That night, I got a call from the hospital. Abby had attempted again, this time using a bedsheet. They'd found her in time, but barely. She'd left a note addressed to me this time. Just 4 words. Make it all stop. I drove to the hospital in a rage I'd never felt before. Mom was already there, playing the concerned mother for the staff. When she saw me, she tried to pull me aside for a talk about family loyalty. I pushed past her and went straight to Abby's room. My sister looked so small in the hospital bed, so broken. I held her hand and promised I would fix this. I would find a way to undo what Mom had done. Abby squeezed my fingers weakly. For the first time in weeks, she spoke to me. She asked me to help Madison's family, to tell them she was sorry, to make sure that little boy found his way home. I left the hospital with new determination. Mom had built her network, but I could build one too. I started with Mrs. Sebastian and the other parents who'd rejected Mom's extremism. We created a group chat, sharing our experiences and evidence. Some had recordings of Mom's recruitment attempts. Others had saved messages where she'd suggested illegal activities. The journalist my aunt knew became interested when I showed her the size of Mom's network. This wasn't just about one family anymore. Mom was radicalizing vulnerable parents, turning their pain into weapons. The story was bigger than false accusations. It was about how grief could be weaponized, how support groups could become recruitment grounds. We worked in secret, gathering testimonies and evidence. Mom was so focused on her blog and speaking engagements that she didn't notice the parents she'd alienated were organizing. She was hammered on her own influence, convinced she was untouchable. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. One of Mom's earliest supporters, a father named Henry whose son had been severely bullied, reached out to me. He'd initially believed in Mom's methods, even helped her research legal loopholes. But when he learned about the fabricated evidence against the O'Reillys, he realized he'd been enabling something monstrous. Henry had access to Mom's private forum, the one where she coordinated with her most devoted followers. He showed me posts where Mom discussed targeting other families, creating a registry of bullies who needed to be handled. The language was carefully coded, but the intent was clear. Mom wasn't satisfied with destroying one family. She wanted to build an empire of vengeance. I compiled everything into a comprehensive report: the forged evidence, Kevin's confession, testimonies from disillusioned parents, recordings of Mom's coaching sessions, and screenshots from her private forums. It painted a picture of a woman who'd transformed her daughter's tragedy into a twisted crusade. My aunt's lawyer friend connected us with a civil rights organization that specialized in false accusation cases. They were horrified by what Mom had accomplished and eager to help. Finally, we had real legal muscle on our side. The first victory was small but significant. Kevin's new lawyer got him immunity in exchange for his full cooperation. He testified about the substances, the coaching, the manipulation. The prosecutor who'd originally handled the case was furious about being deceived, and charges against the O'Reillys started crumbling. Mom found out when the news broke that the case was under review. She called me screaming about betrayal, about how I'd chosen Madison over my own sister. She couldn't understand that I was doing this for Abby, that the guilt was unaliving her faster than Madison's bullying ever had. The O'Reilly parents were released within a week, though getting their son back from foster care would take longer. Madison was transferred to a regular hospital for proper psychiatric treatment. The facility had been medicating her for behavioral issues instead of addressing her sewer slide attempt. Mom's followers started questioning her when news of the false evidence spread. She tried damage control, claiming Kevin had been coerced into recanting, that the system was protecting bullies again. But doubt had been planted. Parents who'd trusted her began wondering what else she'd lied about. The civil rights organization filed lawsuits on behalf of the O'Reilly family. Mom's assets were frozen pending investigation. Her blog was taken down after violating terms of service. The speaking engagements dried up. Her network began to crumble as quickly as she'd built it. But Mom wasn't finished. She showed up at Madison's hospital room, somehow talking her way past security. Madison's parents found her standing over their daughter's bed, whispering something that made Madison start crying hysterically. Security removed Mom, but but the damage was done. Madison had to be sedated. That incident finally got Mom arrested for violating a restraining order. Seeing her in handcuffs should have felt like victory, but it just made me sad. This wasn't the mother who'd taught me to ride a bike, who'd stayed up all night when I had the flu. That person had been consumed by her need for revenge. While Mom sat in jail awaiting her hearing, I focused on damage control. The O'Reillys needed help rebuilding their lives. Madison needed intensive therapy. Abby needed to forgive herself. And somehow, I needed to salvage what was left of our shattered family. The other parents Mom had manipulated formed a support group of their own, focused on healing rather than revenge. Mrs. Sebastian led it with compassion and wisdom. They worked to undo the damage Mom's philosophy had caused in their communities. I moved in with my aunt permanently and got legal emancipation with her help. Dad sent money but couldn't bring himself to come back. The house sat empty, a monument to how quickly a family could implode. Abby slowly began to improve once Mom's influence was removed. Her new therapist specialized in guilt and trauma. For the first time, Abby could talk about her pain without it being weaponized. She wrote a letter to Madison apologizing for everything that had happened. Madison wrote back, and somehow, impossibly, they began to heal together. The legal battles continued for months. Mom was charged with fraud, conspiracy, false reporting, and harassment. Her lawyer argued she'd been driven temporarily insane by grief, but the meticulous planning revealed in her files suggested otherwise. This had been calculated, deliberate, and cruel. During the proceedings, more victims came forward. Other families Mom had targeted through her network. Parents she'd convinced to file false reports. Children whose lives had been upended by her crusade. The scope was staggering. I testified about finding the evidence, about watching Mom's transformation, about Abby's deteriorating mental health. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done, sitting in that courtroom and explaining how my mother had become a monster. But it was necessary. The truth needed to be told. Mom watched me from the defendant's table with eyes I didn't recognize. The mother I'd known was gone, replaced by someone who saw betrayal everywhere, who'd turned pain into poison. The mother's network falling apart this quickly makes me wonder if her followers were ever truly believers, or just people looking for someone to blame for their own pain. That security breach at Madison's hospital feels too convenient. There's something fishy about how she got past everyone to whisper threats to a sick child. When I finished testifying, she mouthed 3 words: "You destroyed us." But she was wrong. She had destroyed us. Her inability to process grief in a healthy way, her need to blame someone for Abby's pain, her descent into revenge, it had torn our family apart. I was just trying to salvage the pieces. The verdict came down 6 months later. Guilty on all counts. Mom was sentenced to 5 years in prison with mandatory psychiatric treatment. It wasn't enough for what she'd done to the O'Reillys, but it was something. Justice. Imperfect, but real. The O'Reilly family slowly pieced their lives back together. The father found a new job. Their son came home from foster care, traumatized but safe. Madison continued therapy and eventually returned to school, though not the same one as Abby. The community had learned hard lessons about rush to judgment and the danger of vigilante justice. Mom's network dissolved completely. Some of her followers apologized publicly for their role in spreading her toxic ideology. Others quietly disappeared, ashamed of what they'd enabled. The movement she'd tried to build crumbled without her charismatic leadership and compelling victim narrative. I visited Mom once in prison. She'd lost weight and her hair was gray at the roots, but her eyes still held that frightening conviction. She told me she'd do it all again to protect Abby. She couldn't see that she'd become the very thing she'd fought against, a bully who destroyed innocent lives. As I left the prison, I thought about the butterfly effect of pain, how Abby's sewer slide attempt had triggered Mom's breakdown, which had destroyed the O'Reillys, which had nearly unalived Madison, which had shattered our family. One act of cruelty had spiraled into a tornado of destruction, but I also thought about the butterfly effect of healing, how Kevin's confession had led to the truth coming out, which had freed the O'Reillys, which had allowed Madison and Abby to find forgiveness, which had stopped Mom from hurting anyone else. Sometimes courage could spiral outward too. The hardest part was explaining everything to extended family and friends who'd only seen Mom's public persona. Many couldn't reconcile the devoted mother they'd known with the manipulative orchestrator of destruction she'd become. Some blamed me for not stopping her sooner. Others praised me for having the courage to stand up to her. I struggled with guilt for a long time. Should I have seen the signs earlier? Could I have intervened before the O'Reillys were destroyed? My therapist helped me understand that Mom's choices were her own. I couldn't have predicted how far she'd go any more than I could have prevented Abby's initial attempt. Abby and I grew closer through the ordeal. We became each other's support system, 2 survivors of different kinds of trauma. She still carried scars, both physical and emotional, but she was learning to live with them. We talked about Madison sometimes, how strange it was that her bully had become a fellow victim of Mom's crusade. The community implemented new programs based on what had happened. Real anti-bullying initiatives that focused on mediation and healing rather than punishment. Support groups with trained facilitators who could spot signs of radicalization. Systems to verify accusations before lives were destroyed. It wasn't perfect. Nothing could undo what had happened, but it was progress, slow and painful and necessary. We'd learned the hard way that pain could make monsters of anyone, that the desire to protect could become its own form of destruction. I started speaking at schools about our story, not to inspire or horrify, but to warn, to show how quickly righteous anger could become something evil, how support groups could become echo chambers, how love could be twisted into a weapon. The presentations were hard, but necessary. Some people accused me of betraying my mother by speaking publicly. They said I should have handled it privately, within the family. But privacy was what had allowed Mom's network to grow. Silence had enabled her destruction. The truth, painful as it was, needed light. As the months passed, life found a new rhythm. Not normal, never normal again, but but functional. Abby graduated from intensive therapy to regular sessions. She even started talking about college, about futures that had once seemed impossible. The guilt would always be there, but it no longer consumed her. Madison's family filed a civil suit against Mom and won a substantial settlement. It couldn't give them back the months of separation or erase the trauma, but it helped them rebuild. They moved to a different state for a fresh start, but Madison and Abby kept in touch through letters. Their correspondence was part of both their healing journeys. Dad finally came back for Abby's high school graduation. He looked older, worn down by everything that had happened. We had a stilted dinner where no one mentioned Mom, even though her absence hung over everything. He told us he was proud of how we'd handled an impossible situation, then left again the next morning. The house was eventually sold to pay for Mom's legal fees and the civil settlements. I helped pack up our childhood memories, sorting through photos of happier times. In Mom's office, I found her original journal from right after Abby's attempt. The early entries were full of pain and self-blame. Somewhere along the way, that pain had curdled into something toxic. I kept one photo from the pile. It showed our family at the beach 2 summers before everything fell apart. We looked so happy, so unaware of what was coming. I wondered if there had been signs even then, cracks in the foundation we'd all missed, or if trauma really could transform someone so completely. The last time I saw Mom before her sentencing, she gave me a letter to give to Abby. I read it first, checking for manipulation or guilt trips, but it was just an apology, simple and heartfelt. She acknowledged the pain she'd caused, the lives she'd destroyed in her misguided crusade. She said she understood if Abby never forgave her. Abby read the letter once, then burned it in the sink, not out of anger, but as a symbol of letting go. She was done carrying Mom's guilt along with her own. It was time to focus on healing, on building a life beyond the wreckage of our family. The ripple effects continued long after the legal battles ended. Kevin got clean and started speaking at addiction centers about how vulnerable people could be manipulated. The parents from Mom's network formed a watchdog group to monitor online support communities for signs of radicalization. The O'Reilly's youngest son started therapy to deal with his foster care trauma. I sometimes wondered what would have happened if Madison had just been kind, if she'd never bullied Abby, never pushed her to that desperate moment in the bathtub. Would our family still be intact? Would Mom still be the loving mother I remembered? Or had the potential for darkness always been there, waiting for the right trigger? But those were useless thoughts. We couldn't change the past, only learn from it. And the lesson was clear. Pain could make anyone dangerous if they let it fester. The desire for justice could become indistinguishable from revenge. Love could be the deadliest weapon of all when wielded by someone who'd lost their way. As I prepared for my own graduation, I thought about the future. College in another state, far from the memories and the wreckage. A chance to be someone other than the girl whose mother destroyed a family. But I knew I'd carry this story with me forever. A cautionary tale about how quickly everything could unravel. Abby decided to take a gap year before college, to focus on her mental health and figure out who she was beyond the trauma. She volunteered at a crisis hotline, using her experience to help other teens in dark places. It was her way of making meaning from the pain, of ensuring some good came from all the destruction. The story made national news eventually, despite our efforts to keep it contained. Think pieces were written about helicopter parenting gone wrong, about the dangers of vigilante justice, about how social media could amplify revenge. Mom became a cautionary tale, her name synonymous with taking protection too far. But for those of us who lived it, she wasn't a symbol or a cautionary tale. She was a mother who'd lost herself in grief and rage, who'd convinced herself that destruction was protection. She was a reminder that anyone could become a monster if they fed the wrong impulses, if they surrounded themselves with people who validated their darkest thoughts. The last update I got about Madison came through her mother. She was doing better, attending a therapeutic boarding school where she could heal away from the trauma. She'd written an essay about her experience for English class, about how being a bully had led to her own victimization, about the circular nature of pain. Her teacher said it was the most powerful piece of writing she'd ever received from a student. As for me, I learned to live with the weight of what I'd done. Turning in your own mother, even when she's guilty, leaves scars. But I'd watched what happened when someone chose loyalty over truth, when protecting family meant enabling destruction. I'd made the harder choice, the right choice, even if it meant losing the mother I'd loved. The truth was, I'd lost her long before the arrest. I'd lost her the moment she chose revenge over healing, the moment she decided that destroying Madison's family was worth sacrificing our own. The arrest was just the final acknowledgement of what had already happened. Sometimes I dreamed about that night in the bathroom, finding Abby in the red water. In the dreams, I got there earlier. I stopped her. Mom never spiraled. Madison never suffered. The O'Reillys lived their normal lives. But then I'd wake up and remember that you couldn't change the past, only try to build something better from its ruins. Watching the mom turn into a prison-visiting cautionary tale while still insisting she'd do it all over again is like watching someone double down on a losing hand while the casino burns around them. I drove straight to the hospital after reading Abby's foreword note. The security guard recognized me and waved me through without checking my ID. I found Abby awake this time, staring at the ceiling tiles like they held answers to questions she couldn't voice. I sat beside her bed and held her hand. She turned to look at me with hollow eyes. I explained that I'd been gathering evidence, that Kevin was ready to tell the truth, that things were finally moving in the right direction. Abby squeezed my fingers weakly and nodded toward the window where rain streaked the glass. The nurse came in to check Abby's vitals and adjust her medications. She mentioned that Mom had been calling every hour demanding updates. The hospital had flagged her number after the last incident. I watched the nurse document everything in Abby's chart, noting the improvement in her appetite and the reduction in self-harm incidents. My phone buzzed with a text from Kevin. He'd met with the new lawyer and signed an affidavit detailing Mom's manipulation. The lawyer lawyer was filing emergency motions to get the O'Reilly case reopened. Kevin included a photo of himself outside the courthouse, looking exhausted but determined. I showed Abby the photo. For the first time in weeks, something shifted in her expression. Not quite hope, but maybe the possibility of it. She pointed to the notepad on her bedside table. I handed it to her and watched as she slowly wrote Madison's name followed by a question mark. I updated her on Madison's condition. Still in the hospital, but stable. Her parents were with her constantly. The facility had transferred her to a proper psychiatric unit where she was getting real help instead of just sedation. Abby closed her eyes and nodded, some tension leaving her shoulders. My Aunt Nathy texted that Mom had shown up at her house again, this time with 3 other parents from her support group. They'd left flyers on the doorstep about protecting children from predators. The security camera caught Mom trying to peer through the windows before my aunt's motion-activated sprinklers sent them running. I stayed with Abby until visiting hours ended. She'd fallen asleep holding my hand, her breathing steady and calm. The nurse assured me they were monitoring her closely. The new medication seemed to be helping with the intrusive thoughts. I left feeling marginally less terrified than when I'd arrived. Back at my aunt's house, I found her in the kitchen, organizing the evidence I'd collected. She'd created a detailed timeline showing Mom's escalation from concerned parent to orchestrator of destruction. The visual representation made the transformation even more stark. Each documented incident showed another step away from the mother we'd known. Mrs. Sebastian called to report that Mom's blog had been reactivated under a different name. She'd already posted about being silenced by a system that protected bullies. The post had dozens of comments from parents offering support and sharing their own revenge fantasies. My aunt immediately forwarded the information to the lawyer. I spent the rest of the evening backing up all our evidence to multiple cloud services. Mom had taught me to be thorough, though she probably hadn't intended for me to use those skills against her. I created encrypted folders with copies of everything, from the forged documents to Kevin's confession video. The next morning brought unexpected news. The prosecutor handling the O'Reilly case had agreed to meet with Kevin and his lawyer. The mounting evidence of Mom's manipulation had created enough doubt to warrant a full review. I felt a spark of hope that maybe we could actually undo some of the damage. I drove past our empty house on the way to school. Dad's car still wasn't there. The lawn was overgrown and newspapers had piled up on the porch. It looked abandoned, which I supposed it was. Our family had imploded so completely that even the house seemed to know it. At school, I noticed the whispers and stares had shifted. Where before kids had looked at me with pity for having a suicidal sister, now they looked at me with something between fear and fascination. Word had spread about Mom's arrest and the false accusations. I'd become the girl whose mother had destroyed an innocent family. During lunch, I sat alone in my car and called the O'Reilly's lawyer. She said things were moving faster than expected. Kevin's testimony combined with the evidence I'd provided had convinced the prosecutor to expedite the review. She sounded cautiously optimistic that the charges would be dropped within days rather than weeks. After school, I visited Kevin at his apartment. He looked better than the last time I'd seen him. The withdrawal symptoms were fading and his hands had stopped shaking. He showed me the pills Mom had given him, which his lawyer had sent for testing. Preliminary results suggested a combination of benzodiazepines and a mild dissociative substance. Kevin had started documenting everything he remembered from Mom's manipulation, the way she'd found him at his lowest point, struggling with debt and addiction, how she'd offered to help him get clean while slowly convincing him he'd repressed traumatic memories, the gradual escalation from sympathy to coaching him on false testimony. We worked together to create a comprehensive timeline of Mom's interactions with him. Every meeting, every med, every practice session where she'd refined his false story. Kevin's memory was still foggy in places from the substances, but he remembered enough to paint a damning picture of calculated manipulation. My aunt texted that Mom's supporters had started a petition demanding her release. They claimed she was a political prisoner, punished for protecting her child. The petition had hundreds of signatures from parents across the state who'd bought into Mom's narrative of victimhood and justice. I screenshot the petition and added it to our evidence files. The comment section was particularly disturbing, full of parents sharing revenge fantasies and offering to help Mom when she got out. She'd created something that would outlive her imprisonment, a network of radicalized parents ready to take extreme action. That evening, the hospital called with good news. Abby had participated in group therapy for the first time. She hadn't spoken, but she'd listened and even nodded along with some points. The therapist considered it a significant breakthrough. Small steps, but forward movement nonetheless. I visited Madison's parents at their hotel. They looked exhausted, aged years in just weeks. Madison's mom hugged me and cried, thanking me for trying to expose the truth. They showed me photos of Madison from before everything happened, a normal teenage girl, not the monster Mom had painted her as. They told me Madison had started journaling as part of her therapy. She'd written about the bullying, acknowledging what she'd done to Abby while also processing her own trauma from the false accusations and family separation. Her therapist said it was a positive step toward accountability and healing. Madison's 7-year-old brother was still in foster care, but the family lawyer was optimistic about reunification once the parents were cleared. The foster family had sent updates saying he was eating again and had started playing with other children. Still traumatized, but resilient in the way only children could be. I gave them copies of all the evidence I'd collected, everything that could help their case. Madison's father broke down crying, overwhelmed by the kindness from the sister of the girl his daughter had bullied. I thought about how Mom would react to me helping them and felt a strange satisfaction in defying her twisted logic. Back at my aunt's house, I found her on the phone with the journalist who'd initially been hesitant about the story. The mounting evidence and the growing network of Mom's radicalized followers had changed her mind. This wasn't just about one false accusation anymore. It was about a dangerous movement that needed exposure. We spent hours on a video call with the journalist, walking her through the evidence and timeline. timeline. She was particularly interested in the support group infiltration and the way mom had weaponized parental grief. She saw the bigger picture, how vulnerable parents could be radicalized into taking extreme action. The next day brought a breakthrough. The prosecutor announced that all charges against the O'Reilly parents were being dropped. The video footage of mom coaching Kevin combined with his recantation had completely undermined the case. They would be released immediately, though reunification with their son would still take time. I was in class when the news broke. My phone buzzed with texts from Kevin, my aunt, and even Madison's parents. For the first time since this nightmare began, something had actually gone right. Mom's carefully constructed false case had crumbled. After school, I drove to the courthouse where the O'Reillys were being released. A small crowd had gathered, including some of mom's supporters holding signs about protecting children. They glared at me as I walked past, recognizing me as the traitor who'd exposed their hero. I watched from across the street as Madison's parents emerged, blinking in the afternoon sunlight. They looked dazed, unable to quite believe they were free. Their lawyer guided them to a waiting car, shielding them from both the protesters and the few reporters who'd shown up. Kevin stood beside me, tears streaming down his face. He kept apologizing, saying he should have been stronger, should have resisted mom's manipulation. I reminded him that he'd been drugged and vulnerable, that mom had known exactly how to exploit his weaknesses. That evening, mom called from jail. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. Her voice was calm, eerily so. She asked if I was happy now that I'd freed a bully's enablers. Kevin's timeline of mom drugging him with benzos and dissociatives while coaching him through false memories sounds almost too calculated to be real, but those preliminary test results on the pills make me wonder just how deep her planning went. When I tried to explain that Madison was just a troubled kid, not a monster, mom laughed. The sound sent chills down my spine. She told me I'd regret this when Madison hurt someone else, that I'd have blood on my hands for enabling a predator. I hung up without responding. There was no reasoning with her delusion. In her mind, she would always be the hero of this story. The journalist published her first article about mom's network the next day. It focused on the support group infiltration and the radicalization of grieving parents. She'd interviewed several parents who'd rejected mom's extremism, including Mrs. Sebastian. The article went viral within hours. Mom's supporters responded predictably, calling it fake news and character assassination. But other parents started coming forward with their own stories of being approached by mom, of being encouraged to take extreme action against their children's bullies. The network was larger than even I had realized. I visited Abby again, bringing printed copies of the articles. She read them slowly, processing the extent of mom's actions. When she finished, she looked at me with clearer eyes than I'd seen in weeks. She whispered her first words to me since the attempt. "Thank you." The O'Reilly family reunification happened faster than expected. A judge expedited the process given the circumstances of the false accusations. I watched from my car as their 7-year-old son ran into his parents' arms outside the courthouse. The pure joy on their faces made everything I'd risked worth it. Mom's sentencing hearing was scheduled for the following month. Her lawyer had advised her to plead guilty in exchange for a reduced sentence, but mom refused. She insisted she'd done nothing wrong, that protecting children wasn't a crime. Her delusion remained complete. The school held another assembly, this time about the dangers of vigilante justice and the importance of due process. They didn't mention mom by name, but everyone knew. Some kids approached me afterward, sharing their own experiences with bullying and thanking me for preventing their parents from potentially following mom's path. Madison was released from the hospital to continue outpatient treatment. Her family had decided not to return to our town, too much trauma associated with it. But Madison sent Abby a letter through her therapist, a genuine apology, acknowledging the pain she'd caused while also forgiving Abby for what mom had done. Abby read the letter dozens of times. She started writing a response but couldn't find the right words. Eventually, she just sent back a simple drawing of two hands reaching toward each other. Sometimes healing didn't need words. The civil rights organization filed their lawsuits on behalf of the O'Reilly family. Mom's assets, what little remained, were frozen. The house would definitely need to be sold now. I spent a weekend packing up what remained of our belongings, sorting through memories of a family that no longer existed. In Abby's room, I found her old journals from before the attempt. The entries showed a gradual decline, Madison's bullying getting worse while Abby felt increasingly isolated. But there were also entries about good days, about hope. I saved them for when Abby was ready to remember who she'd been before the darkness. Dad finally called from his brother's place. He'd seen the news coverage and wanted to check on us. The conversation was awkward, full of long pauses. He sent money for Abby's treatment and my expenses, but couldn't bring himself to come back. Some wounds were too deep. More articles followed the first, each revealing new aspects of mom's network. Parents in other states admitted to being recruited for the Justice Project. Some had gone through with false reports before backing out. The scope kept expanding, showing how one woman's grief had metastasized into something dangerous. Mom's supporters began fracturing. Some doubled down, convinced it was all a conspiracy, but others started questioning what they'd been told. Parents who'd trusted mom began realizing they'd been manipulated. The comments on her reactivated blog shifted from support to confusion and anger. I testified before the school board about the need for better oversight of parent support groups. They implemented new guidelines requiring trained facilitators and mandatory reporting of any discussions about retaliation or violence. It wouldn't prevent another mom entirely, but it might help catch the warning signs earlier. Abby was discharged from the hospital after 6 weeks. She moved in with our aunt and me, unable to return to the house where everything had started. She was fragile but determined, taking her medications religiously and attending therapy 3 times a week. We established new routines, morning walks before school, cooking dinner together, movie nights where we avoided anything with bullying or revenge plots. Slowly, carefully, we built something resembling a life from the wreckage mom had left behind. The journalist won an award for her series on parental radicalization. She donated the prize money to organizations supporting both bullying victims and those falsely accused of crimes. In her acceptance speech, she thanked me for having the courage to expose my own mother. I watched from my dorm room, feeling strange about being thanked for destroying my family. Mom's final supporter meeting happened the week before her sentencing. Only a dozen people showed up, die-hard believers who still thought she was a hero. They talked about continuing her work, about creating the registry of bullies she'd envisioned. But without Mom's charisma and organizational skills, it fizzled out. Kevin got clean and stayed that way. He started working with a therapist to process not just the manipulation, but the addiction issues that had made him vulnerable. He sent me updates sometimes, photos of milestone chips from NA meetings. Small victories, but victories nonetheless. The O'Reilly family sent a Christmas card with a photo of them at their new home in another state. They looked happy, or at least healing. Madison had a shy smile. Her brother was laughing at something off camera. Normal kids living a normal life, which was all they'd ever been despite Mom's narrative. Abby decided she wasn't ready for college yet. She got a part-time job at a bookstore and volunteered at a crisis hotline on weekends. Using her experience to help others gave her purpose. She still had bad days, but they were getting fewer and farther between. I started college in a different state, somewhere nobody knew our story, but I carried it with me anyway, the weight of everything that had happened. In my ethics class, I wrote about the intersection of grief and justice, about how love could become destructive when twisted by pain. Mom was sentenced to 5 years with possibility of parole in 3. She showed no remorse during the hearing, insisting she'd protected her daughter from a predator. The judge recommended psychiatric treatment, but Mom refused to acknowledge she needed help. Her delusion remained intact. I visited her once before leaving for college. She looked smaller in prison gray, but her eyes still burned with conviction. She told me I'd understand when I had children of my own, that I'd do anything to protect them. I left knowing she'd never comprehend the irony that she'd become the very thing she'd fought against. The ripple effects continued. Other parents who'd been radicalized sought help. Support groups implemented safeguards. Schools developed better bullying intervention programs that focused on restoration rather than punishment. Small changes, but meaningful ones. Abby and Madison continued their correspondence, two survivors of different traumas finding understanding in shared pain. They never became friends exactly, but they found a kind of peace. Both were in therapy, both were healing, both were trying to build lives beyond what had happened. On the anniversary of Abby's attempt, we visited the beach where our family had vacationed in happier times. We didn't talk about Mom or Madison or everything that had followed. We just sat on the sand, watching waves erase footprints, thinking about how quickly life could change and how slowly it healed. The house finally sold to a young family with twin daughters. I hoped they'd fill it with better memories than we'd left behind. The money went to legal fees and settlements, nothing left of the home where we'd grown up, just another casualty of Mom's crusade. I kept in touch with Mrs. Sebastian and the other parents who'd helped expose Mom's network. They formed a legitimate support group for families dealing with bullying, one focused on healing and healthy interventions. They asked me to speak sometimes, sharing our story as a warning. The last letter from Mom came on my birthday. She'd written it in careful script, probably revised dozens of times. She said she loved me, that everything she'd done had been for our family. She still couldn't see that she'd destroyed the very thing she'd claimed to protect. I kept the letter, but never responded. Life moved forward in small increments. Abby started dating someone from her support group, someone who understood trauma and healing. I threw myself into my studies, planning a career in social work. We built new traditions, found new ways to be family without Mom. Madison graduated from high school a year late, but with honors. Her mother sent me the announcement with a note thanking me again for everything. Madison was headed to art school, channeling her experiences into creativity. Another small victory, another life reclaimed from the wreckage. The journalist wrote a book about parental radicalization, using our story as the centerpiece. She donated a portion of the proceeds to our family and the O'Reillys. It became required reading in some sociology courses, a cautionary tale about grief and vengeance. 5 years for turning suburban moms into vigilantes gets you less time than some people get for stealing a car. Guess the justice system grades on a curve when your weapon of choice is a Facebook group and misplaced maternal instinct. 5 years later, at Abby's college graduation, I thought about how far we'd come. She walked across the stage with confidence, no longer the broken girl in the hospital bed. She'd majored in psychology, determined to help other trauma survivors. Mom would have been proud if she could have seen past her own delusions. Dad came to the graduation. He sat separately from us, still unable to fully rejoin what remained of our family. But he was there, and that was something. We had lunch afterward, awkward, but not hostile. Time hadn't healed everything, but it had dulled the sharpest edges. I never saw Mom again after that prison visit. She served her full sentence, refusing early release that would have required acknowledging wrongdoing. She emerged unrepentant, still convinced she'd been persecuted for protecting her child. Some delusions were too deep to ever fully break, but the rest of us found ways to heal. Imperfect, incomplete healing, but healing nonetheless. We learned to live with the scars, to build something new from the ruins, not the family we'd been, but the family we could become, and maybe that was enough. All right, folks, that's a wrap on today's little brain spiral. Appreciate you letting me ramble and wonder out loud. Always interesting to toss thoughts around together.